Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my pleasure to present our speaker for this month's author talk in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, and it is Ismael García-Colón. He is a professor of anthropology at the College of Staten Island and the SUNY Graduate Center. He is a historical and political anthropologist with a focus on immigration and colonial migration, guest workers, farm labor, U.S. empire, Puerto Rico, and the United States ethical and racial histories. He is the author of Colonial Migrants at the Heart of Empire, Puerto Rican Workers on U.S. Farms, which was published by the University of California Press in 2020, and the winner of the 2020 Frank Bonilla Book Award from the Puerto Rican Studies Association. His research explores the Puerto Rican experience in U.S. farm labor and its relation to U.S. colonialism and immigration policies, and how government policies formed and transformed modern subjectivities in Puerto Rico. So, welcome, Professor. We are so grateful for you to speak with us today. And before we jump into your presentation, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. There will be a survey available at the end of the webinar, so if you have time, I ask that you please complete the survey. We appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And if you want more information on what's going to be talked about today, as well as the general Latin American experience in New Jersey, there is a book coming out in 2025 from Rutgers University Press called Latinas, Latinos in New Jersey, Histories, Communities, and Cultures. So I recommend that you put that on your radar, and if you have a chance when it comes out to read it. What's going to be talked about today is a chapter from that book, so we are really, really excited for that. And then one last thing before we jump into the presentation, I just want to do a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device, like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you're having. And as I mentioned, if you do have any questions, you can use the Q&A or the chat buttons and send them our way. We'll be happy to address them at the end of Professor Garcia-Colón's presentation. So that is everything that I have for you. So it's my pleasure to turn it over now.
Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation and for the New Jersey Public Library for hosting me. So let me share my PowerPoint that I prepared for today. So the title of my presentation is Puerto Rican Farm Workers in the Garden State from the 1950s through the 1970s, but we are going to be talking about the 1940s and also the 1980s. And like he mentioned, I'm a professor of anthropology at CUNY, at the College of Staten Island and the Graduate Center. This presentation is based on Chapter 7, titled Recoger Tomates, Puerto Rican Farm Workers in the Garden State, 1940s through the 1980s. That is going to be published soon in January in the book Latinas, Latinos in New Jersey. And also my book, Colonial Migrants at the Heart of Empire, Puerto Rican Farm Workers on U.S. Farms, that was published in February of 2020. What people don't know about the history of Puerto Ricans in New Jersey is that there's a link between the formation of those communities and the migration of Puerto Ricans to work in farm labor. Many communities in New Jersey are the result of this migration, like the communities in Vineland, Perth Amboy, and Camden, among many others. New Jersey was and still is the center of Puerto Rican migrant farm workers. There's still in some farms in New Jersey Puerto Rican workers that migrate every season to work in the harvest. If you go to for example, to places in Swedesboro, around Vineland, Glassboro, and Cumberland counties, you will find still Puerto Rican farm workers in the farms. But this began in the 1940s. In the case of New Jersey, actually, it began in the Seabrook Farms as part of a contract that the Seabrook Farms had with the U.S. War Emergency Program, which was a program that the government of the United States established during the Second War to make sure that they will supply, right, that that farmers in the United States had the labor supply necessary to work at the farms. And since then, right, there has been this constant migration of Puerto Ricans to work in the farms of New Jersey. Between 1952 through 1965, 93,000 contracts were filled in these contracts sponsored by the government of Puerto Rico just in New Jersey. Around the whole United States were around 400,000 contracts that the government of Puerto Rico filled during this period of time. This only talks about the people that migrated to New Jersey through these government contracts, but many more, usually twice or even more workers migrated without contracts to work in the farms. Most Puerto Rican farm workers migrated to the Middle Atlantic states and the region of New England, and this began in the 1950s. But in order to understand this migration, we have to go back to 1898. In 1898, Puerto Rico becomes a colony of the United States, a territory of the United States. There's the Spanish-American War, where the United States occupies and gains the control of Puerto Rico. So Puerto Ricans began to be part of the United States in 1898. By 1917, U.S. Congress granted U.S. citizenship for Puerto Ricans, which accelerated migration from Puerto Rico to the United States. And as I was mentioned, during the Second War, the labor demands in the United States and high unemployment in Puerto Rico led to the hiring and migration of Puerto Rican workers, not only to the farms, but also to factories and work in the service sectors throughout the northeast of the United States, also the Midwest, and in some cases, the west of the United States. Like I was mentioning, Seabrook Farms was one of the first places where Puerto Rican farm workers arrived to work during the 1940s, but also the Campbell Soup Company and the Herf Company in Swedesboro. The first largest group of Puerto Rican farm workers arrived in Glassboro as part of recruitment efforts by the Glassboro Service Association, This was a cooperative of farmers that was established in Gloucester County in the 1940s. And by the 1946, they began to bring Puerto Rican farm workers to New Jersey. However, many of the Puerto Rican farm workers that were being hired not only for the Glassboro Service Association or the Seabrook Farm or the Campbell Soup Companies, et cetera, but were being hired by other farm workers in the region, in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York. These farm workers began to confront problems because the people that the labor agents that were arriving to Puerto Rico were promising them higher wages and different living conditions. And what many of these workers found was lack of work, low wages, high price of food, and unsanitary living and working conditions. And these workers began to complain to people in their communities, and also politicians, elected officials in Puerto Rico, and the government of Puerto Rico began to receive a lot of correspondence from workers and then families complaining about the situation that these farm workers were experiencing in New Jersey and in other parts of the United States. And as a result of these complaints, the government of Puerto Rico investigates and began to issue and enact these laws to protect farm workers. The first law that the government of Puerto Rico passed was in May of 1947, Public Law 89, which required the Commissioner of Labor to intervene in the migration of Puerto Ricans and monitor contracts. Any labor agent that will arrive to Puerto Rico to recruit workers will have to be registered under the Puerto Rico's Department of Labor. And the Commissioner of Labor had to approve the recruitment of workers. And also in December of 1947, the government of Puerto Rico enacted Public Law 25, which basically created the Bureau of Employment and Migration. And this government agency then became in charge of the Puerto Rico Farm Labor Program. The government of Puerto Rico established a farm labor program in which they contacted farmers, they recruited the workers in Puerto Rico, and they sent these workers to the United States. The government of Puerto Rico in 1949 also made arrangements for an agreement with the U.S. Employment Service, in which the U.S. Employment Service will send just positions in farm labor to Puerto Rico and will consider Puerto Rico as any other state of the United States, since Puerto Rico was a U.S. territory and Puerto Ricans were U.S. citizens. And in 1952, the federal government, the Congress, enacted and passed the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Act, which included Puerto Rico as part of the territory of the United States for employment purposes. If farmers wanted to bring workers from other parts of the world, like during this time, the United States had actually began to the Mexican Bracero program and the West Indian labor programs, where they recruited workers from Mexico and from the Caribbean, the British Caribbean colonies. So in order to do that, farmers first needed to prove that there were not enough domestic workers. And with the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Act and the H-2 visa program, in order for before recruiting foreign workers, farmers had to hire Puerto Rican farm workers. And with that, then the government of Puerto Rico makes sure that the government of the United States and the farmers in the United States were considering Puerto Rican workers before hiring, again, any foreign workers from Mexico or any part of the Caribbean. And all of this, the immediate effect was to promote more Puerto Rican migrant farm labor in the United States. So the government of Puerto Rico established this Puerto Rico Farm Labor Program, right, as a result of this legislation. And the Bureau of Employment and Migration had this, the Migration Division, an office under the Department of Labor, the Puerto Rico Department of Labor, that had offices in Puerto Rico in order to hire, right, these Puerto Rican farm workers, but also throughout the United States to oversee, right, the work and the migration of Puerto Ricans in farm labor and in other industries, and also to take charge of any issues that the Puerto Ricans communities that were forming, right, as a result of all the migration that was happening from Puerto Rico during the 1940s through the 1950s. These offices were in charge of making sure any Puerto Rican will be successful in settling in the United States. And the Migration Division had two important offices in New Jersey: the Camden office, that oversaw initially in the 1950s the Puerto Rico Farm Labor Program, and the Keyport office in central New Jersey. These offices also promoted, right, this migration to New Jersey, and also contributed to make New Jersey as the center of Puerto Rican farm labor migration to the United States. The Bureau of Employment and Migration and the Migration Division were influenced by those guest worker programs that I mentioned, right? The Mexican and the British West Indian labor programs. In New Jersey, there were two principal labor camps and associations, farmers associations, that hire Puerto Ricans through this farm labor program. In Glassboro, the Glassboro labor camp, built and run by the Glassboro Service Association, and the Keyport farm, run by the Farmers and Gardeners Association. And that's why, right, the Migration Division had an office in Keyport, because there was this large labor camp in Keyport. And Glassboro is really close to Camden and also Philadelphia. The government of Puerto Rico also had an office in Philadelphia. By 1952, 6,000 workers were migrating from Puerto Rico to New Jersey every year. And by 1968, 9,500 just workers that were hired for these two associations under contracts by the government of Puerto Rico. Usually the workers arrive to the airports, and from there they were transferred to Glassboro and the Keyport camps. And from these larger camps, then they were distributed to smaller camps, usually to the farms that had in their payroll 10 to 15 farm workers, and they had their own labor camps. This is a photo of the Glassboro labor camp in the 1950s, and the labor camps lasted until the 1990s. And I believe the structure is still standing, but now it has is used for recreational purposes in Glassboro. If you notice, there's the flag of the United States and the flag of Puerto Rico, because it was a camp for these Puerto Rican migrants, and the government of Puerto Rico also helped to subsidize the building of this labor camp. The government of Puerto Rico also issued literature, right, to convince workers to hire Puerto Rican workers. This is an example of a brochure or a pamphlet that the government of Puerto Rico issued, explaining to farmers the benefits of hiring Puerto Rican farm workers. And there was a large number of farmers that wanted to hire Puerto Rican farm workers and hire Puerto Rican farm workers through the 1950s and 1960s. The government of Puerto Rico also issued this type of pamphlets. In this case, the title of this pamphlet is "Know Your Fellow American Citizen" from Puerto Rico, to teach the communities around the farms that Puerto Ricans were U.S. citizens entitled, right, to a state in the United States, that these were not undocumented workers or foreign workers. These are immigrants. These were U.S. citizens from Puerto Rico. And there were many instances that farmers or local politicians will write to the government of Puerto Rico, asking the government of Puerto Rico, basically, or the local authorities, to deport Puerto Rican farm workers after the harvest. But they couldn't do that because Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. So this was part of this campaign, right, of the government of Puerto Rico to teach the local population about Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rico. This is a sample of a labor contract from the 1958. It was a bilingual contract with tiny letters that you cannot read there, and it was even difficult to read for farm workers. And in many cases, farm workers were illiterate, but they were signing this contracts issued by the government of Puerto Rico and negotiated between the government of Puerto Rico and the farmers in New Jersey, particularly, right, this to the Gardeners Association and the Glassboro Service Association. The workers, initially, the government of Puerto Rico even leased airplanes to transport the workers, to facilitate the transport of workers from Puerto Rico to the United States. Most of the workers they flew to Millville in New Jersey and also Philadelphia, and from there, they were transferred to these large labor camps. This photo is of a cargo plane that was used during the Second War, and then it was refurbished to carry passenger. But can you imagine how scary that was? And there were many accidents where these workers lost their lives migrating from Puerto Rico to to New Jersey. These are Puerto Rican farm workers arriving to Buffalo. I couldn't find any photos arriving in New Jersey, but this is right, show how rudimentary were the airports and the way that these workers were transported from Puerto Rico to United States. And when they arrived, right, these were the labor camps. These were the sleeping quarters. Usually these iron cast beds. And still, if you go to some labor camps, you are going to be you're going to find this kind of beds that still is where farm workers sleep in New Jersey labor camps. And this is how, right, the labor the housing in the outside looked. And still, right, this is actually the housing that you will find. This actually, this photo is from New York, but this is similar to the contemporary housing of Puerto Rican farm workers in New Jersey. The government of Puerto Rico also supervised and make sure, right, that the living conditions and the were adequate and the wages were paid for farm workers in the fields in New Jersey. This photo is actually in New Jersey of a trip that the government officials took from Puerto Rico took in New Jersey in the 1950s. And they visited the labor camps and the workers in the field. Workers, many times workers complain about some farmers not paying their wages. There was one case in New Jersey where this worker went to claim wages that were unpaid to the farmer. The farmer called the police. The farm worker went to jail. He didn't know English, so he was jailed. And so the government of Puerto Rico had to intervene and take him out of jail and basically defend his rights. And this was something very common among the experiences of farm workers in New Jersey and the whole northeast of the United States. And this is actually a letter from a farm worker complaining about the treatment that some Puerto Rican farm workers experience, right? He says, quote, "It seems that the general belief of Americans is that the worker in the camp is their own toy, which they can play with at their will, making false promises, having them waste their time. Others like me have seen them. And I can say that that has happened. Take a Puerto Rican by the neck and shake him, and later, with the help of the police, throw him and his luggage outside without cause. Are the governments of Puerto Rico and the United States paying employees to sit in an office and do nothing for the worker? It is just that the Puerto Rican is useful only when there's a problem. And this person is referring to the harvest, right? Be that the war or the possibility of losing the harvest. It should not be like this because we are as much citizens as those born here. Well, they were born here in American territory and we under the American flag. There are many abuses committed against Puerto Rican citizens in the camps. There are so many that one of these days we'll have to protest," unquote. So these workers were complaining all the time to the government of Puerto Rico, and the government of Puerto Rico was intervening most of the time in their on their behalf and helping them to recover unpaid wages. But during the 1960s, the situation, and in early 1970s, the situation of Puerto Rican farm workers began to change in the northeast of the United States, particularly in New Jersey. Farmers began to look for foreign workers to replace Puerto Rican workers. They began to consider the government of Puerto Rico contract as expensive for them. And many growers went to the courts trying to challenge the contract of the government of Puerto Rico and the fact that the Department of Labor will send as a requirement job positions to Puerto Rico, making an obstacle for farmers to hire foreign workers. And initially, they won the battle. The farmers won the battle in court, and little by little, the farm labor program of the government of Puerto Rico became reduced in the whole United States. At the same time, in New Jersey, in the late 1970s, early 1970s, the Comité de Apoyo a los Trabajadores Agrícolas, or CATA, the Farm Workers Support Committee, was established in Vineland, actually in Glassboro, in southern New Jersey. And CATA began to organize farm workers from Puerto Rico. CATA also established the organizing workers committee, which basically became a labor union for farm workers in southern New Jersey. They won some contracts in some farms in New Jersey. They had to fight legally for the establishment of what became COTA instead of CATA, which was this labor union for farm workers. But eventually, the farmers began to hire undocumented workers instead of Puerto Ricans, decreasing the number of Puerto Rican farm workers in the fields. The government of Puerto Rico was also experiencing problems with the Puerto Rican labor program until the 1990s, when the government of Puerto Rico changed its policies to Puerto Ricans in the United States and eliminated the Migration Division and all the programs for Puerto Ricans in the United States, including the farm labor program. So by 1993, there were around 500 workers laboring for the Glassboro Service Association. And after 1993, the Glassboro Service Association began to hire Mexican workers from as part of the H-2 program of the federal government. So as an overview, most Puerto Rican farm workers began to migrate during the 1940s and 1950s, when the government of Puerto Rico began this program. There was this widespread campaign of the government of Puerto Rico for the government of the United States to consider Puerto Ricans as domestic workers because they were U.S. citizens. And this also began to be more intense after the passing of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952. But this, right, the use of Puerto Rican farm workers in large numbers ended in the 1990s with the rise of neoliberal policies of the government of Puerto Rico. And these charts basically represent the number of contract workers of the government of Puerto Rico. If you notice, in the late 1940s, it's around 5,000 workers, mostly in New Jersey, and a couple of hundreds by the 1990s, late 1980s, mostly concentrated in New Jersey. But during the 1960s, using this graph, that there were many Puerto Rican contract workers in U.S. farms. And during that time, it is estimated that in 1964, 43,000 Puerto Rican farm workers were laboring in the fields in New Jersey. So it was more, even the 1960s is the time period with when a large number of Puerto Rican farm workers are in the fields in New Jersey. And this coincides with the fact that there's a large increase of the Puerto Rican population in New Jersey as a whole. In 1960s, there are around 55,000 Puerto Ricans living in New Jersey. By 1970, there's around 136,000. So many Puerto Rican farm workers will arrive seasonally, work in the farms, and then stayed, find work in the factories in New Jersey or any other kinds of service jobs, and stayed and bring their families from Puerto Rico. And this also was fueling, right, the establishment and the growth of Puerto Rican communities in Newark, in, like I mentioned, in Camden, in Vineland, Perth Amboy, and other small Puerto Rican communities around New Jersey. So if you want to learn more about this history of Puerto Rican farm workers, again, look for my chapter 7, a recoger tomates, which refer to pick up tomatoes, because most of the Puerto Rican farm workers at the time, 1950s and 1960s, were arriving to work in tomato farms in New Jersey. And then in Puerto Rico, people developed this saying that when they were migrating to farm work in the United States, they will say, I'm going to pick up tomato, even though some of them were working just harvesting other kinds of vegetables. But look for my article and for the whole book about Latinos and Latinas in New Jersey this coming January. And if you want to learn more about the history of Puerto Rican farm workers, again, look for my book, Colonial Migrants at the Heart of Empire. So thank you for listening. And now, if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Garcia-Colón. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to send them to us using the Q&A or the chat feature, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. I guess we'll lead off with traditionally, when we think of agricultural workers in the United States, we often think of slave labor or indentured servitude. How was this different than that kind of conception? Because it seems like the Puerto Rican government was very involved in this program.
Mhm. Well, the difference is that the slaves stayed in the farms, right? In the plantations, in the farms. The Puerto Ricans could leave the farms after the harvest, and many of them did. But there was always this complaint, right? That they were treated, the farmers will talk about their experiences in the labor camps as feeling like living in a prison. And in some reports from newspaper articles, some journalists attacked some farmers for keeping farm workers as slaves in labor and living conditions that were not that were unhealthy and exploitative, and that they, for low wages, they were exploiting the workers.
Somebody asked for a copy of the PowerPoint, if that's okay. I can make that available unless you have any concerns about that.
The problem is that the photos, right?
Okay.
Unless you can maybe post it on the internet and they can uh, see it on the internet, but the problem is that it's
Okay.
copyright material from the archive,
Sure.
so
Okay, no problem. All right, let's see if there are any other. Um, Somebody said, I too was a Puerto Rican farm worker. I live in Vineland and was born in 1968. Thank you so much. You brought me back to my earlier years.
yes, I mean, Violent. Most of the farm workers that went to Violent usually come from the town of Utuado. I mean, there's other people from other towns, but from Utuado in Puerto Rico, in the highlands of Puerto Rico, Utuado. So it seems that Paco Gomez is also from Utuado, and they went to pick blueberries in Violent, which many of these families used to pick up coffee in the region of Utuado. So from picking coffee in Utuado, they went to pick and harvest blueberries in Violent, and that's why there's a large Puerto Rican population in Utuado. And yes, Hamilton is the blueberry capital of the world, and many of these farm workers arrived there for that, and they established their families, right? And that was the initial step that these families did when they arrived uh, in New Jersey and uh, in the United States. In other parts, we're more doing more harvesting vegetables, tomatoes, uh, and that's why, right? If you go to Vineland, you are going to find still workers from Puerto Rico. I have visited farms there. I visited farms last year, and there in Vineland were workers from Villalba. Villalba is a town in the southeast of Puerto Rico, and workers from Villalba still travel to Vineland.
My uncle and dad came in the early 1950s to Vineland Farms. They eventually moved to New York City and then New Hampshire, so appreciate your presentation. Were there strikes similar to the ones initiated by Dolores Huerta in California?
Yes, in the 1980s, when and late 1970s, when CATA was organizing, the agricultural workers support committee was organizing the workers, and there were conflicts with some farmers. I think there's one case of a farmer that there was a strike because he didn't want to negotiate a contract with COTA, which was the labor union that CATA had created. And the workers struck against this farmer, and they eventually went to the courts, and uh, they won. They won their contract with this farmer, and there were other incidents, but at a small scale. In New Jersey, that was the largest. But throughout the Northeast, there were also incidents of protests by Puerto Rican farm workers. Initially, in the 1970s, ATA, before CATA, there was ATA, which was the Agricultural Workers Association. And the Agricultural Workers Association began organizing workers in Connecticut, but then also established offices in Connecticut. They unified themselves with the United Farm Workers Committee, right, with Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huertas. But eventually there were problems in their view of organizing workers, and the United Farm Workers decided to stop the funding of ATA, and ATA stopped, and the organizer from ATA, I think his name was Juan Irizarry, if I don't mistake. I cannot remember his name right now. But then he was the one that led the efforts together with the American Civil Rights Civil Union to organize these workers in New Jersey and to establish CATA. So, then this led the farmers to stop wanting Puerto Rican farm workers in their farms, and it decreased the number of Puerto Rican farm workers in the United States, and also in mostly in New Jersey. But of course, right, I have met farm workers that they still go to farms in New Jersey where their parents and grandparents began to migrate in the 1950s. So their grandchildren are still going to the same farms today. I interview and talk to some workers in Violent, and I asked, right, and I asked the farmer too the same question: how did you find the Puerto Rican workers? And they will tell me, well, because my father hired them, and he brought them initially, the Puerto Rican workers, and now I hire them. And I was speaking to this farmer that he was in his late 70s. So his father was probably the one that began to hire these workers in the 1940s, late 1940s, or 1950s. So some farmers have good relationships with workers. They will visit them in Puerto Rico. They will establish ties with their families. And so the workers will keep coming, right, even to the present time. And they will prefer those Puerto Rican farm workers than hiring undocumented workers or other workers. And in other cases, I went to this farm in Sudesboro with Puerto Rican farm workers, where the farmers thought that the Puerto Rican workers worked better, and he just kept hiring Puerto Rican workers than workers from other nationalities.
You mentioned 936 and its elimination, which has wreaked havoc in Puerto Rican's economy. Do you think this will eventually lead to Puerto Rico becoming a state or not?
That's a political question. I think it's actually quite the opposite. With the pro-statehood government in Puerto Rico, right, eliminated the 936 section, eliminated the offices of the government of Puerto Rico in the United States to make Puerto Rico more similar to a state. But in the process of eliminating the 936 section, what it created, right, Congress eliminated the section, and it created the economic crisis that Puerto Rico is experiencing now, that it made it worse with Hurricane Maria. U.S. Congress is not going to admit a state with the economic crisis and the poverty levels that Puerto Rico is currently experiencing. That's my opinion.
this is a just a comment, but I was born and raised in Vineland. Some of my uncles were farm workers. Some of my aunts would work at the blueberry farms. I remember the small blueberry bus that would come into the apartment complex where I lived to pick up people for work. Some worked in different cities in New Jersey. My father's friends from that lived in Puerto Rico, would come to work in the farms in the summers.
Mhm. So they were the ones that stayed in Puerto Rican farm workers. They stayed, brought their family, and kept working in the farms. Or they would work in the factories, and then when there weren't jobs in the factories, they would go back to working in the farms. But since they were with their families, they would live in their own housing, and buses will transport them to the farms. A practice that was very common even during the 1940s, when farmers will go and recruit workers in Camden and in Philadelphia and take them to the fields. So what he's describing is something that it has been very common in the area of southern New Jersey. We also have to think, right, that New Jersey especially southern New Jersey between Philadelphia and New York City makes it or that was one of the main reasons why it became this agricultural hub, and that's why they require these large numbers of farm workers, particularly when, right, you have this agricultural boom in the 1940s, and there's this need to hire farm workers. The local population doesn't want to work in the farms anymore. They are working in factories, in the service sectors. Uh, and so that's what it created, right? These jobs for these Puerto Rican farm workers, and that now are mostly occupied by immigrant farm workers, right? Most of the domestic labor force in New Jersey doesn't want to work in agriculture, and is immigrants, and few Puerto Rican farm workers from Puerto Rico that are fulfilling agricultural jobs uh, in New Jersey. But we can say that in the history of New Jersey, Puerto Rican played this important role in making sure that the harvest of millions, right, of millions of dollars in food took place during the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s in the state. And if New Jersey is the Garden State, Puerto Ricans has something to do with that. So I see that in some of the comments, people mentioned the minimum wage in Puerto Rico is $7, and so workers are paid more in the United States, and that's why they keep working in the farms. And that was the initial reason why workers from Puerto Rico arrived in the 1940s. In the 1940s, a worker could make $1 a week in Puerto Rico as the most. And in a farm in New Jersey, they could make 40 cents, 30 cents per hour. So in a couple of days, they could make what they made in a week in Puerto Rico. So this wage differential is what fuels migration from Puerto Rico to the United States, and fuels migration from other parts of the world, right, to the United States. But yes, they come from Utuado, but also from San Sebastián, Las Marias. I met last year a worker from Las Marias in Swedesboro.
Did the labor contract provide healthy and safety protections for Puerto Rican farm workers and their families, and how were these administered?
The farm contract was only for single men. The government of Puerto Rico and also the trends in the United States was to hire foreign workers, single men, foreign workers, not families. So the government of Puerto Rico did the same thing basically, and was negotiating the contracts. And yes, they were supposed to supervise and make sure that the labor camps had living conditions that were adequate for workers. But this is in theory, right? In practice, was that many of the labor camps were not adequate, and then there were the complaints, and the government of Puerto Rico had to go and check the workers and try to resolve the problems. The government of Puerto Rico, in some cases, will ban the hiring of Puerto Rican farm workers by certain farmers. And all the workers were supposed to be hired in Puerto Rico through this labor contract issued by the government. And any farmer that will go to Puerto Rico and hire workers will be sanctioned. And there were many cases, including cases from New Jersey, where the government of Puerto Rico and the courts in Puerto Rico sanctioned farmers association for not hiring Puerto Rican farm workers with the contracts. But the reality was that there were many more workers arriving without contracts than the ones that were arriving to contracts in New Jersey and in the United States. For example, the number of farm workers in the 1960s is estimated in the 40,000s in New Jersey, but it was around 10,000 workers that were being hired to the government contract during the same period of time. So in practice, the government was not able, right, to manage this migration and stop people from migrating. The government tried. They put agents in the airports, so if they will notice people migrating, they will ask them if they were migrating with contracts or without contracts. They will stop them, and they will give them orientations. They will follow up against the farmers. But all those efforts were not able to stop the unsupervised migration of Puerto Rican farm workers.
Will overtime for farm workers ever be a reality in New Jersey?
Um, I think the farmers' lobbies are so strong, not only in New Jersey, but in the United States, right? That today, I mean, to the present time, there's no a federal law that guarantees overtime and labor organizing. There are no labor unions that could be organized among farm workers because of they were left out from federal legislation. I cannot predict, but it doesn't seem that is happening or will happen soon. But it's something that we should be considering, because we want the food that we consume to be produced in an ethical way, right? That their rights are not violated in the process. And for that, we need laws that guarantee the rights of farm workers.
Thank you for sharing your informative presentation. It's good to see that our people made significant contributions to New Jersey and that you are shining a light on those contributions.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
I don't see any more questions, so I think we can go ahead and end it there. Anything you would like to close with as we end the presentation?
I mean, what I want to emphasize is that even though Puerto Ricans are a small group, ethnic group in New Jersey, they represent, I think, around 5% of the population of New Jersey in the present time. They have contributed to the development, the agricultural and industrial development of New Jersey. They are an integral part of their communities in New Jersey, and people should see them, right, as part of the history and life of the Garden State.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Ismael Garcia-Colón, for a fantastic presentation in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. We really appreciate you coming and speaking with us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
And I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. We appreciate your continued support. And I just wanted to close with everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Bye.